December 11th, 2008, a Thursday morning. Two FBI agents knock on the door of a penthouse apartment on East 64th Street in Manhattan. The man who answers is 70 years old, silver-haired, calm, wearing a bathrobe. His name is Bernard L. Madoff, former chairman of NASDAQ, founder of one of the most respected investment firms on Wall Street, philanthropist, pillar of the Jewish financial community. A man whose client list read like a who's who of global wealth, banks, hedge funds, charities, celebrities, and tens of thousands of ordinary retirees who had trusted him with everything. He invited the agents inside, offered them a seat, then he told them, quote, zero. In that moment, the largest financial fraud in human history was over. $65 billion. Gone. Not lost in bad trades, not wiped out in a crash, simply invented. For 17 years, possibly longer, Bernard Madoff had been running the biggest Ponzi scheme the world had ever seen. And the most terrifying part of the story isn't the number. It's this. Nobody was supposed to catch him. He wasn't caught by a regulator. He wasn't exposed by a journalist. He wasn't undone by a whistleblower going to the FBI. His own sons turned him in, after he confessed to them in his living room the night before. And here's what should keep you up at night. For 17 years, multiple people tried to warn the world that Madoff was a fraud. They filed detailed reports. They sent letters. They practically begged the SEC to investigate. Nobody listened. Stay until the end. And you'll understand not just how one man stole $65 billion, but why the smartest people in the world handed it to him willingly, why 3 government investigations missed it completely, and how the same trap is set for you right now under a different name. Before we get to Madoff, there is someone else you need to meet first. Her name doesn't matter. She was a retired nurse from New Jersey. She had spent 35 years working, saving carefully, living below her means. When she retired, she had approximately $400,000. Not a fortune, but enough. Enough to feel safe. Enough to stop worrying. A friend introduced her to a financial advisor who had access to Madoff's fund. She received statements every quarter showing steady, reliable returns. 11% some years, 9% in others. Never a loss, never a bad quarter. For 12 years, she slept well at night. In December 2008, she received a different kind of letter. Not a statement, a notice. The fund had collapsed. Her account, all $400,000 plus 12 years of reported gains, did not exist. It had never existed. The statements she had kept in a folder in her filing cabinet were fiction. Printed by a machine in a basement in Midtown Manhattan, she was 74 years old. She is not a footnote in this story. She is the story. Everything that follows, the fraud, the system, the failure, the silence, exists because of what happened to her and to thousands of people exactly like her. You cannot understand the Madoff fraud without first understanding that Bernard Madoff was genuinely, legitimately brilliant. He grew up in Queens, New York, the son of a plumber. He started his investment firm, Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities, in 1960 with $5,000 saved from working as a lifeguard and installing sprinkler systems. He was 22 years old. What he built over the next 3 decades was real, legitimate, and revolutionary. This is critical to everything that follows. Because the fraud didn't replace the legitimacy. It hid behind it. Madoff ran 2 completely separate businesses under one roof. The 18th and 19th floors of the Lipstick Building in Midtown Manhattan were the legitimate trading operation. Hundreds of employees, real transactions, real profits, real technology. The 17th floor was something else entirely. The 17th floor was the Investment Advisory Division, the business that managed money for Madoff's private clients. It had a tiny, isolated staff. Access was restricted. Even senior employees from the floors above were not permitted inside. This separation was deliberate, brilliant, essential. The legitimacy of the floors above gave the fraud below a shield of credibility that no ordinary scammer could manufacture. When regulators came to investigate Madoff, which they did multiple times, They saw the real trading operation, the real systems, the real compliance infrastructure, and they left satisfied. They never looked at the 17th floor hard enough. Here's what Madoff told his investment clients he was doing with their money. It was designed to sound sophisticated, and for most of his clients, the name alone was enough. They trusted Madoff so completely that they never asked him to explain further. The returns Madoff reported were not spectacular by hedge fund standards. That was intentional. He wasn't promising 40% a year. He was promising 10 to 12% reliably every year in good markets and bad. From 1991 to 2008, Madoff's reported returns showed positive performance every single year. Every single year. He reported gains during the dot-com crash of 2000 to 2001. He reported gains during the 2002 recession. Every down market that punished every other fund in the world somehow left Madoff completely untouched. The problem, the mathematical impossibility, was sitting in plain sight for anyone willing to do the arithmetic. To execute the split strike conversion strategy at the scale Madoff claimed, he would have needed to buy and sell options contracts representing a significant portion of the entire U.S. options market. On some days, the volume he claimed to be trading would have exceeded the total options volume that actually existed. He wasn't trading at all. No trades, no strategy, no stocks, no options. The 17th floor simply received money, fabricated account statements using in-house software, printed fake trade confirmations, and mailed them to clients. Every reported trade was invented after the fact, using actual historical market prices to make the numbers look plausible. The most sophisticated element of the Madoff operation wasn't financial, it was social. Most Ponzi schemers chase victims. They advertise, they cold call, they promise extraordinary returns to anyone who will listen. Madoff did the opposite. He made it difficult to invest with him. Access to Madoff's fund was by referral only through a tight network of feeder funds and intermediaries. You had to know someone. And even then, Madoff might decline to take your money, not because he didn't need the cash, but because the act of refusal created something more valuable than any pitch: desire. When someone tells you no, you want it more. When something is exclusive, you believe it must be worth having. If your brother-in-law has had his money with Madoff for 10 years and gets consistent statements showing 11% annual returns, you don't question it. You beg him for an introduction. Everyone assumed someone else had verified the numbers. Nobody had. This is the part of the Madoff story that transforms it from a tragedy into something closer to an institutional scandal. His name is Harry Markopolos. Markopolos was a financial analyst at a Boston investment firm. In 2000, his boss asked him to reverse engineer Madoff's strategy to figure out how Madoff was generating such consistent returns so the firm could replicate it. Markopolos sat down with Madoff's numbers. Within 4 hours, he concluded that what Madoff was claiming was mathematically impossible. Not unlikely, not suspicious, impossible. He spent months building a comprehensive, mathematically rigorous case and submitted it to the SEC's Boston office in May 2000. Nothing happened. In 2005, he submitted a 21-page document titled "He Named Madoff Explicitly." He provided a detailed breakdown of the mathematical impossibilities. He listed 29 red flags. He noted that his own life might be in danger for coming forward. The SEC's investigation in 2006 was, by any measure, a catastrophic failure. Investigators accepted Madoff's explanations without independent verification. They failed to contact the options exchanges to confirm his trading volume. They allowed Madoff himself to suggest which documents they should review. Madoff later said that when the SEC first came to investigate him, he was convinced they had enough to arrest him. He prepared mentally for prison. Then they left. The 2008 financial crisis killed the fraud. As markets collapsed through autumn 2008, Madoff's clients, facing losses everywhere else in their portfolios, began requesting withdrawals. In a Ponzi scheme, mass withdrawals are terminal. Redemption requests in November 2008 totaled $7 billion. The Chase Manhattan account 703 had approximately $234 million left in it. Madoff stalled. He tried to raise new capital to cover the outflows. He failed. Madoff backed into a corner, took his sons to his apartment, and told them the truth. The investment advisory business was a giant Ponzi scheme. It had been basically a fraud for years. He estimated the losses at approximately $50 billion. Mark and Andrew Madoff contacted a lawyer that night. The lawyer called the FBI. The next morning, the agents knocked on the penthouse door. $65 billion is a number too large to feel real. So here is what it actually looked like. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, Nobel Peace Prize winner, one of the most respected moral voices of the 20th century, lost his foundation's entire $15.2 million endowment. The son who had turned his father in, who had done the right thing, who had cooperated fully with investigators, hanged himself on December 11, 2010, exactly 2 years after his father's arrest. He was 46 years old, and the retired nurse from New Jersey, and the 23,000 others like her. People who had saved carefully, trusted completely, and received a letter one morning that made 30 years of discipline disappear. Bernie Madoff received a 150-year sentence. He died in federal prison on April 14, 2021, at 82 years old. Of the $65 billion in claimed losses, approximately $17.5 billion represented actual cash invested by clients. The rest was fictional profit that had never existed anywhere except on fabricated statements. The court-appointed trustee has recovered approximately $14 billion over 15 years of legal proceedings. Billions of dollars are still missing. Consistency is not proof of safety. Every investor uses volatility as a proxy for risk. If a fund never loses money, the brain interprets it as safe. Madoff weaponized this instinct, the very thing that should have triggered alarm. The impossible consistency was the thing that made people feel protected. If you ever see an investment that produces positive returns in every market condition for many years in a row, that is not evidence of genius. That is a red flag. Social trust is the most exploitable asset in finance. Madoff's fraud survived not because he was good at hiding numbers. Harry Markopolos broke it in 4 hours. It survived because the people who could have questioned it trusted the people who trusted Madoff. Regulators are not your protection. They are your last resort. The SEC had 3 chances to stop Madoff. They had a detailed expert report handed to them. They failed, not because they are villains, but because they are a bureaucracy subject to the same social dynamics as everyone else. Regulated does not mean safe. Registered does not mean legitimate. Your protection is independent verification, custody confirmation, and the willingness to ask inconvenient questions even when doing so feels rude. The fraud you don't recognize is the one that will hurt you. Madoff is famous now. His name is synonymous with Ponzi scheme, but the next Madoff will not look like Madoff. They never do. They will have a different name, a different strategy, a different social network, a different asset class. The mechanics, new investor money paying old investor returns, fabricated statements, social exclusivity as a substitute for transparency, will be identical. The retired nurse from New Jersey opened her letter and lost everything because she trusted a system that was designed from the very beginning to feel trustworthy. The question is whether you would recognize him before the letter arrives. Now you might.